Hello and welcome to this Simply Health webinar on the topic of the menopause. My name's Sian Evans and I head up Colleague Health and Wellbeing for Simply Health. This is such an important topic, and just to reinforce how important it is, according to a recent inquiry by the House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee, nearly 900,000 UK women leave their jobs as a result of menopausal symptoms. And there's a real knock-on effect on organisations, not only from a diversity perspective of women leaving at that age, but also the gender pay gap and company productivity. Yet, despite these shocking statistics, menopause is still often considered a taboo subject. Another fact, according to the latest CIPD report, says that 41% of organisations don't provide any menopausal provision for their staff. We're here today to shine a light on that topic and have a really good conversation about the menopause and some of the menopause symptoms. I'm joined by a fantastic panel of speakers today who will share their experience with you. The speakers I'm joined with are Baz Moffatt, who is former GB rower and founder of Well HQ. Welcome, Baz.
Thank you.
Helen Coomber, who's going to share her personal story with us today. Thank you for joining us today,
Thank you.
Helen. And Debra Clark, who's Head of Specialist at Towergate Health and Protection. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
So thank you all so much for joining us today. I know we're well set up to have a really good conversation. So firstly, turn to you, Baz, to help set the scene. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the menopause is?
Yeah, so it feels really confusing, doesn't it, as a topic? But I think if we look at it really simply, a definition of the menopause is when a woman's periods stop. So your ovaries stop producing estrogen and your periods stop. And that's kind of what the definition of the menopause is, but it's obviously can get a bit more complicated than that. And there's lots of terms thrown around, but the overriding term for this stage of a woman's life, this midlife stage, is menopause. You've got the perimenopause, or some people refer to it as the menopausal transition, or other names. And I like to describe it as kind of the opposite of puberty. So if you think of the hormonal roller coaster that teenage girls will go through as they're starting to get a regular menstrual cycle, perimenopause is kind of the opposite of that. But again, it's a hormonal roller coaster, but it's a time when we're stopping having our periods. But we don't just, if you have a natural menopause, you don't just stop having your periods. It can take years. It can take some women 10 years to have that perimenopausal journey. But that's not the whole story though, because not everybody will experience a natural menopause in their 40s going into their 50s. Some people will have a medical menopause or a surgical menopause, which is caused by cancer treatments or from hysterectomies or other kind of medication that they're taking. And some women will experience an early menopause that happens for kind of natural reasons, but at very early times in their life. So really, it's not that kind of cliched 50-year-old woman that's going to be experiencing this.
It's much more complicated than that from what you're saying. And I love the words that you use, the roller coaster, because I think that really does, describe exactly what it's like.
Yeah, and I think it's a roller coaster that you don't want to let anyone know you're on. So I think that if I often compare it to pregnancy, which again is a huge life stage which many women will experience, you're proudly pregnant and you will wear often tighter clothes, and you're happy for people to open the door for you and give you a seat and get you some water and check the temperature in the room. But during menopause, which every single woman will experience at some stage in her life, it's inevitable, we hide it. It's full of shame and secrecy and judgment, and so that's why many people suffer in silence.
You mentioned there are different stages and many different symptoms. Can you talk us through some of the most common symptoms that someone might expect from those different transitions?
Yeah, so I think the most common ones, which probably come as no surprise, are the hot flushes. In America, they call them hot flashes. But the hot flushes, and people just get really hot, and it can just come on, and it's often triggered by stress or anxiety, or can happen at night time. But some women can be drenched in sweat. So hot flushes, 80% of perimenopausal women will experience hot flushes. Insomnia is another big one. And that's debilitating. And we've all been exhausted in our lives. Everyone will have experienced insomnia at some stage, but to have that chronic insomnia is so debilitating, and also exacerbates many of the other symptoms. Weight gain, brain fog, bladder, bowel and libido can all be affected. It's because estrogen is this wonderful hormone that we have receptors all over our body to function well. And so when we're on this hormonal roller coaster and estrogen is peaking and troughing and kind of slowly declining, all the cells that are used to functioning with great levels of estrogen just are struggling now to kind of get used to that. So those are kind of the headline symptoms, but actually there are hundreds. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, just even the symptoms you're describing sound, horrific when you put them all together, and I'm sure some people would experience all of them at the same time. So
yeah, and I think it's not a disaster. And I think that, if you look at sort of the normal distribution of how women experience these symptoms, 25% of women will cruise through the menopause, like having, they kind of won't even notice. 50% of women will experience symptoms that they notice and it will affect them, their work, their relationships, their energy levels. And then 25% are flawed and debilitated and will think of leaving work, will leave work, their marriages might break down. And those women are, really seriously, they're really seriously affected by the menopausal symptoms. But if you look at those stats I've just gone through, you're talking about 75% of menopausal women will be affected by these symptoms to some extent.
So if you had to say, who does it affect?
Everybody. So you've got, and this is the key thing, isn't it? Because I think so often in women's health, we talk to the women and we take them away and we talk to them privately and we medicalise whatever they're experiencing. And, in a workplace situation, like the women tend to own women's health. Like the women are the ones talking about pre and postnatal or endometriosis or that they're talking about it. But actually, everybody has a mum, everybody knows a woman, many people will have sisters and cousins and aunties and work colleagues. So this is a societal thing that in my opinion, we all need to own.
And Baz, how long does the menopause last?
Yeah, not forever. So I think that, the roller coaster, it can last up to 10 years, but some women get through that a lot quicker. So once estrogen has done its thing and disappeared, actually, for the majority of women, your symptoms should calm down. Some women, unfortunately, still will experience some symptoms, but most women will stop experiencing those midlife perimenopausal symptoms. And so really you're then back and you're kind of okay. So it's really, we're just saying, but I suppose you can't define it like being pregnant. You can't define it like 9 months of pregnancy. It is flexible and it has to be. So it's just a case of saying, okay, this is just what I need the support for right now, but I will be able to get back.
And I guess that's so different for everybody.
Totally.
The experience is different for everybody. Lastly, Baz, what are some of the common misconceptions around the menopause?
I think many women are fearful of HRT. And I think that there's been much brilliant work done on TV and in the media to kind of get rid of that misconception. But so many women are really fearful of the risk associated with HRT. And that comes from studies that were done over 20 years ago on populations of women who were in their 60s. And it showed that the HRT that existed back then increased your risk of breast cancer. So therefore, everyone who was on HRT stopped taking it, doctors stopped prescribing it, and women stopped asking for it. So for the last 20 years, the industry has really lost all its skills around HRT. But HRT, the science has evolved, the medicine has evolved, and it is now safe, mostly safe. And you have to make your own assessment there, but for majority of women, it is safe, and it really helps you not only manage the symptoms of perimenopause, so that kind of hormonal roller coaster and the symptoms associated with that, but in terms of your long-term health and your longevity, it also massively helps with that as well.
Great, thank you. So the research has clearly shown that there's a lack of provision in organisations to help women through the menopause. And before we go to our panel discussion, I'd like to just turn to Helen and ask her to share her personal story, if that's okay with you. I think it was really good just to be grounded in the experience of a colleague going through the menopause. So thank you so much for sharing your story today. Firstly, there are, as Baz said, so many different menopause symptoms, and experiences can be so different as women transition. Can you talk us through your symptoms and your personal experience?
Yes, of course. I think it was over a 10-year time span that, you know, it was at its worst. My first experiences really were the poor sleep. So I would find I was getting up in the night really hot, not really realising it was menopause at that stage. So, you know, a new bed was recommended. We got one of these memory foam beds, and that was the worst thing in the world possible. It just made everything so much worse. So that was an expensive mistake. And then, you know, it's getting up in the night to go to the loo when you didn't used to need to do that. And mood swings. You know, I've become a she-devil. My poor husband deserves a medal. You know, I wouldn't be like it at work, but, you know, I'd be very short with him, and would you speak to your colleagues at work like that? No, I wouldn't actually, I'm really sorry. But you don't actually know you're doing it, and it's just a split second thing, and the slightest little thing can set you off. So that was really, yeah, it was really not very nice. I used to get quite anxious about things. I was probably one of the oldest people in the team. And yeah, you're always worried that, you know, all these young people are coming up behind you, and are you going to be considered, you know, good enough to do your job? So that was a bit of a worry. Then I had about 2 or 3 years of really bad, heavy periods. And at that stage, you know, you need to be very well prepared wherever you go. Black is the favourite colour, you know, white linen trousers were very in fashion at the time, and that was a definite no. And that's really stressful because, you know, you've got to really plan where you're going, and, you know, is there a loo nearby, and, you know, how am I going to be at work? So, yeah, that's pretty tough. And I was always very sort of worried about HRT because you'd had such bad press about it. And so I thought, oh, you know, there's all these risks associated with HRT, I'm not going to do that. It's really isolating. You sort of feel, you know, my mum didn't tell me anything about it. She barely told me about periods. So, you know, she wasn't going to talk about that. There weren't very many people of my age in the team. So, and I'm a couple of years older than my best friend, and she wasn't going through that stage. So you feel like, oh, this is a bit of a secret. I need to keep it to myself because nobody else is really talking about it. So that's quite isolating. Yeah, so yeah, there was a lot of things going on. I think paranoia, you know, you go into work one day and someone doesn't say hello, and you think, oh, what have I said? What have I done? What, you know, have I upset that person? And it becomes this big thing in your mind that you've upset somebody, you overthink everything. It's a very weird place to be.
That definitely sounds like it, and there's so many different elements that you've picked up on there. Like the white trousers, you just, you know, having to think through what you wear, having to think through and make sense of other people not talking to you maybe, and what that's triggering for you. How did it affect you at work?
It was, you're trying to pretend that everything's okay, but actually under the surface, you're absolutely in a state of panic. You know, like this graceful swan that's swimming along, but pedalling furiously under the water. And we were going through sort of some restructures at work, and so it was quite a stressful time anyway, but you don't want to sort of stick your head up over the parapet and say, actually I'm having the menopause and I'll not be up to work today. You just want to get your head down and pretend all is well. Every now and then there'd be a little, you know, you'd have a time in your life where you think, actually, I really need some time out. It's too much. I'm going to blow. You know, the slightest thing could set me off, and that's really stressful because you're just trying to keep a lid on everything all the time. Yeah, it was really hard.
So it sounds like it really affected your mental well-being as well.
Oh, definitely. We were learning new things, new systems. I can remember having a training session with one of the younger team members that came over from our Winchester office, and she was explaining this to me, and it was like she was speaking a different language, and I was thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to get this. I'm going to get found out. You know, I'm a big fraud. You know, what's going to happen? And it took me ages to learn new things when before I was like the oracle, people used to come to me. And all of a sudden, it's gone. I used to love Popmaster, and I could rattle off all the hits of the 70s and 80s, and it was like I was trying to go through a file of facts, trying to find, you know, and I'd be out with my husband and we'd bump into somebody in the street and we'd have a long conversation for about 15 minutes. And he said, "You didn't introduce me." And it's like, I can't remember their name. You know, that sort of thing is really very stressful.
As you were going through all of this, how receptive were your employer to what you were going through, your experience?
Through that whole sort of 10-year period, I probably had about 4 different managers. So they did vary. I remember one particular day I was at boiling point, and I knew that, you know, I needed some time out, and I asked if I could have a day's holiday the next day, and I spent half a day texting backwards and forwards trying to justify this time off. In the end, I got the day off, but it was so stressful trying to get it. Just, and I should have just called in sick. You know, the day after I came back, I just thought, what, you know, that was stupid. I should have just called in sick because I wasn't fit for work on that particular day, and having a day out would have, you know, just made a lot of difference to me. So that was a negative thing. At one stage I did have my notice in, but I was persuaded that that wasn't, you know, in everyone's best interest because I enjoy my job. So we made a little arrangement where I went part-time for 12 weeks. So I finished work earlier, and that made a huge difference. And it meant that, you know, the pressure was off. There were lots of things going on besides the menopause, but that really helped me. So that was great. I mean, I've been pointed in the direction of the EAP, you know, the Employee Assistance Programme, which has helped on occasion. You know, just being able to speak to somebody that you don't know and tell them everything is really, really good. Just to get some advice and to make sense of how you're feeling and why you're feeling it, and you're not alone. I think the turning point for me actually at work was we had Health Assured came in and did a half a day seminar on menopause, and being in a room with colleagues that felt the way I did and sharing experiences was groundbreaking. I felt like a different person afterwards because you're not alone and other people are going through it, and it was just great. And I came away and told everybody, you really should have gone to that, and if they have another one you should go, because you've all got aunties, mums, sisters, etc. And it's relevant to everybody. Yeah, so.
What other provisions were in place to help support you?
It was just the EAP service. There was no, nothing sort of on display to say, you know, are you feeling like this? You know, we had things about mental health awareness, but nothing to do with menopause particularly. When you think there's probably 50 different things, symptoms that you can have, but we had it on the back of the toilet door, you know, are you suffering from this? Are you suffering from that? Which are very similar to the things you get with menopause. I think had there been things like that, that would have been really helpful.
And during this time, did you have any conversations at all with your manager about how you were feeling and the symptoms that you had?
Not really. I just didn't want to draw attention to the fact that that's where I was, because, you know, you feel a bit like once you hit menopause, that's it. You know, you're on the scrap heap then, game over. You know, you can't have kids anymore. It's a downward trajectory to sort of old age, really. That's the way you're made to feel. But, you know, there's life in me yet.
When you look back at your experience, how big a part did your employer, do you think, play in the experience that you had?
I think the negative experience was a shame, but I think that's due to lack of education and awareness. You know, I was 20 years older than my manager, so she hadn't gone through that, and maybe her mum hadn't gone through it either, so you know, she didn't have that knowledge. It would have been really helpful if there'd been more resources available and training at that time, and if it hadn't been such a taboo subject, it would have been brilliant, you know, to be able to share and say, you know those things that we've all been taught, well, that's what I'm going through now, and you know, I could do with a bit of support. That would have been really useful.
How different do you think your experience would have been if all of those resources would have been available to you?
Oh, it would have been a game changer, because you know, to get some advice from somebody who's been trained, even though you know, they haven't got to be a leading expert, but to have some support and know that they understand what you're going through, even though they might not have experienced themselves, would have made a huge difference. And you know, my younger colleagues, you know, they were in their 20s, so it's never going to be on their radar. But if they had had some awareness, I might have felt more comfortable saying, you know, I'm feeling a bit, you know, off colour today, so you know, if I'm a bit grumpy, they would understand, but you just feel like you've got to just keep a lid on it all the time. So that would have been really helpful.
Helen, thank you so much for your honesty. You know, it's a very personal topic to talk about, but you've been so honest with us here today. Just really appreciate it. Thank you. So we've heard from Helen about her personal experience, and now I'd like to turn the discussion to really start to talk about what employers can do to really help and support colleagues that are going through the menopause. I'm going to open up to a panel discussion, and a question for Debra first, if I can come to you. From your experience of supporting wellbeing programmes, what can we do to address menopause in the workplace?
So I know the CIPD said that 41% of companies fail to offer any menopause support, but I've actually seen stats that say it's as high as 90%. So it is quite worrying that workplaces are maybe not doing as much as they could to support people through menopause, through their wellbeing programmes. The number of companies that actually have a menopause policy in place is less than 5%. So that could be one thing that a company thought about doing, putting a menopause policy in place. And CIPD and Channel 4, for example, have published their policies. So there's somewhere for people to go to get a template and then adapt accordingly. But it doesn't have to just be a policy, I think. In fact, I think more important is trying to help normalise the conversation. And hold employee workshops and training and education for all staff, so that they can learn more about the vast range of symptoms and how they might be able to support their colleagues that might be going through that. Offering access to good, reliable resources is so important. You could go onto Google, but you don't know what you're going to find, you don't know how reliable it is. So somewhere that simplifies and gives accurate information is really important. Another thing a business could do is think about setting up menopause support groups. So the opportunity for smaller groups to get together, to share experiences, or people not yet at that phase, or maybe a gentleman with a wife, a mother going through it, that could also join and just have that time together. I think line managers, as with lots of elements of wellbeing, are completely critical to supporting employees in the workplace. They're the first people that probably notice when something isn't just quite right with a member of staff. So, but as a line manager, do you know what to do? And actually, are you a medical expert? No. So you've got to be very careful to find the balance between helping the member of staff feel safe to talk to you, but not trying to diagnose or preempt and guess. Can you imagine anything worse than going in to say, I'm feeling a bit foggy at the minute, I can't seem to hold my memory, and your line manager saying, you're menopausal? You'd be like, I don't think so. But him or her saying, maybe you need to go, you know, why are you feeling like that? Are there particular situations, and how can we help? The menopause almost is secondary. It's more dealing with the supporting that individual through their symptoms at that time. And then there are some really small adjustments that you could make depending on what the member of staff, what their symptoms were. So companies that wear uniforms, one thing is to think about the material of the uniform, its breathability, provide places where people can go and change if they need to. That's a really important thing for a female. Provision of fans, maybe letting someone sit near the window, and taking some additional breaks, offering a bit of flexi time. So if their symptoms, if it means that they've had a really bad night's sleep, maybe starting a bit later, but then making the time up, just allowing that female that bit of space to get themselves back in order can make all the difference. But I think that sort of the reassurance and that psychological safety to come to work and be able to share with people is so important. The final thing, and it would be remiss of me not to mention employee benefits, as that's my line of work, but there are employee benefits that companies can put in place that could help some women with some of their symptoms. So things like access to virtual GPs. We know that seeing a GP can be really challenging, particularly post-lockdown. And access to an employee assistance programme, so that counselling and advice support would be really helpful. There are some options out there now that could actually help a female get access to a specific menopause doctor or consultant, discounted gym memberships, dietitians, nutritionalists, acupuncture, and again, that information, that reliable source of information, employee benefits can help with all of that.
I mean, there's a wealth of examples that you've just shared there. I mean, you think, you know, an organisation's got every opportunity to help support their colleagues, haven't they?
Absolutely, and it just takes somebody to acknowledge that we need that level of education in the workplace, that this is something that a significant amount of their staff are going to go through, and even more staff will be impacted by. And so, yeah, if they could just sort of set the ball rolling with some education, maybe a webinar, a support group, some information, that would start the conversation and things could progress from there.
Thank you. Baz, from your experience of working with organisations, is there anything else that comes to mind?
I think the overriding strategy should be we need to keep women at work. So menopausal policies are not an opportunity to offer part-time work or early retirement. If you frame it like that, you're suddenly thinking fans, flexi time, but it might even be, you might extend that out to paying for HRT. I work with some organisations which are doing that, but that's on offer. But we need to keep midlife women at work, and we need to keep them there for so many reasons. So I think I like that as a mindset approach to this stage of life. I think normalising the conversations around menopause, so not leaving it until a disaster, you're not a disaster, but not leaving it until crisis point. Mm-hmm. That you had to go through, you went through a lot before you got anywhere near asking for half a day off. Mm. And it's like, well, can we, if it had been normalised, so there would be, regular webinars or regular education, or there was like a blog post about menopause, it would just be like, okay, like I can start asking questions about this even when I'm not in it. Mm. And I think that's really important, because we heard very clearly from Helen how debilitating her symptoms were, and it's really hard to ask for help when you're in a really bad place. And I think that if we can encourage people to talk when they're not in that bad place, and that would be a good thing. And the last thing I would say is that if you're managing women, if you're young, if you're old, if you're a man, or if you're a woman, you can still get to real grips with your menopause policy if you have one. And if you don't have one, look at what other people have got, look at what's out there and go, how can this be applied? But you can become really articulate in this space without becoming a gynecologist. You don't need to become a women's health expert, but you have to say, actually, we've got this fabulous GP service. If you ask these questions, you'll get to one that's got women's health expertise. So it's you, even if you're never going to experience it yourself, you can still get your head around it.
I know for us, this is definitely a topic that we've really put some focus on in terms of our colleague health and wellbeing offer. With webinars, I know you're coming along next week to do a webinar for us, looking at our menopause policy. So definitely putting a lot of focused attention on this. Helen, just coming back to you, from your experience and listening to the conversation, how does that make you feel in terms of some of the benefits that are on offer that we could be that organisations could be utilising?
I think it'll be brilliant. I think whatever we do and whatever we're talking about now, if it can help 10 people to have that conversation, that's a fantastic thing. I was recently talking to one of my clients who's very proactive in this area, and they had some fantastic ideas, like if they're in the office, they have a black cardigan on the back of a chair, which doesn't belong to anybody, but if someone happens to have a bit of an accident, they can just walk up, put the black cardigan, go to the toilet, and in the toilet they got a little pack, and it's got loads of ladies' sanitary wear and some spare knickers and things like that they keep in the toilet just for those occasions. I mean, that's fantastic, because that's really thoughtful, and it makes you feel like, my God, they're really on board with this and they really care. So things like that are really important. And just like a poster, menopause, it could be this, or this. Do you experience any of those? Just to think, oh, actually, that might be what it is, and maybe having a forum once a month. Mm-hmm. So that everyone could come together, and it don't need to be half a day, an hour. 11 o'clock the last Friday of the month, let's all get together and have a chat. I think that would be so brilliant.
Can I add to that? And like what you've just said there, it's not expensive, is it?
No.
Nothing there costs very much money at all. And I think that this doesn't have to be complicated. And I'm sure, maybe putting words in your mouth, Helen, but you don't want women to experience what you have experienced. And I'm sure you feel very passionate about that. And many midlife women who've had a rough ride feel exactly the same. So there are so many people that actually want to do this and want to help and want to make their workplace a better place. It'd be great if they had a policy, but we don't need to wait. We don't need to wait for a policy to arrive, do we? There's a lot we can do for not very much money at all, with just the goodwill of people in the organisation that want to help.
And it sounds like, from what you're all saying, it's actually the small little things that can make the biggest difference, and it's actually the compassion that an organisation has.
Yeah, that being listened to, and just feeling like someone's understanding and wants to help. As you say, the compassion could mean the world to that individual at a time when they're just feeling a little bit confused and lost. So yeah, really important.
I mean, I would imagine even just recognising a symptom can have such an impact on someone that hasn't got that voice to actually start sharing their experience, and then being able to be supportive and provide some support for that individual is going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think line managers and colleagues have a role to play, and just making it okay for someone to share with you, or just acknowledging that you seem to be having a bit of an off day. Is everything all right? And that could mean the world to that individual, because that sense of isolation that Helen so unlike me, put so well earlier on, it just makes you feel like someone's got your back.
And Debra, just coming back to you for a moment, we've heard about a whole host of symptoms. What challenges do these symptoms give an organisation?
Well, it's huge. You're talking about women at their peak of their careers potentially, or reaching the peak of their careers. And in the introduction, you talked about 900,000 women leaving their jobs. There's 18% of women actually looking to leave their jobs. Women of menopausal age are the fastest growing demographic in the UK workforce. But 45% say that menopausal symptoms have negatively impacted them at work. So you're right, there's a huge risk, I think, to businesses if they don't do things properly. Diverse workforces have consistently shown in different studies and research to deliver the best results in terms of productivity, loyalty, return on investment, and a lot of that is around what women can bring to a business. So some interesting research stats. So 34% are better at working out compromises, this is women. 34% are more likely to be honest and ethical. 30% are more likely to provide fair pay and benefits, and 25% are better at mentoring. So having females in your workforce, and maybe particularly at senior levels, can really impact a business. So with a business, if they don't respond to women in the workplace with their menopause, they could see that they have an increase in absence rates, an increase in staff turnover. That then means increased recruitment costs. We're looking for companies that want to improve retention, recognise females as that valuable talent, increase that well-being, that employee well-being experience, and in turn increase productivity, reducing the risk of employee burnout. So we need to look at both the business side of things and looking at whether we're supporting people as a collective, but also then looking at women individually and some of the small adaptations that we've spoken about that might mean that you can keep that female in work. 47% of women who have taken time off did not feel that they could tell their employer that menopause was the reason, and that's just wrong. If we all understood a bit more about the impact, then people could be honest and we could do more to support them in the workplace, creating those diverse environments, which then is good for business, good for the individual, and good for their families as well.
I mean, it really does link back to Baz's point about it's all about keeping women in the workplace and
Absolutely.
really thinking about what we can do and what support we can put around women to make sure that they flourish during this time.
Absolutely. It's so easy for females to worry. I think Helen referred to the anxiety and that paranoia, and you feel like you're not good enough because the brain fog, because of some of the symptoms that you're suffering with, the insomnia that makes you less able perhaps in work to function to your top abilities.
Thank you, Debra, for that really insightful answer. The recent CIPD report shows that menstrual health, fertility and menopause transition were in the bottom 5 in regard to support by employees. Do you think there's a general lack of understanding of the menopause amongst employers and the impact it might have?
I think it's a changing landscape and that things are changing. Larger companies maybe are more aware, and SMEs less aware of the need to support their staff through all of those life stages that were mentioned in the CIPD report. There is information out there, there is support, and there are benefits. We've spoken about some of the ways that a business could support their staff, but I think it's inconsistent and there's not enough of it. And what there is patchy and maybe not of the quality and reliability that you would want to see. I think there's also has to be an acknowledgement that as females, we maybe haven't helped matters, that we haven't openly wanted to talk about it. We've referred to it as a taboo subject, that it's personal. So why would an employer think, actually, that member of staff might want some help with their menopause, fertility, periods, whatever element it is? We can't even talk to our best friends about it. So sometimes, so why would an employer think that we'd want them to talk? But I think times are changing, and the pandemic actually has fast forwarded that. Employee expectations have changed vastly, and whereas before they probably wouldn't have looked at their employer for support around their well-being and their health, now they're actively seeking employers that do provide support in these ways. It isn't all about the salary so much as it used to be. So I just think the more we can talk about menopause, the more we can raise the awareness, the more women can then access support when they need it, as they personally need it as well.
I think you're so right, and it's the inconsistency in different organisations and just the different levels of knowledge and understanding and organisations sharing that. And just as we said earlier, one small thing can make such a difference. And if we can make a difference to one person, it would have been worthwhile.
Absolutely. Keeping that female in that place of work with that talent and that level of knowledge that they have could be invaluable for that business. And to look more long term at keeping that person there with all those skills is really something that businesses should think about. And knowing it doesn't cost a lot of money. It's not about throwing a policy or throwing a benefit. It's about the culture, that safe, open environment where line managers and colleagues are respectful of everybody else and just want to help, want everybody to be the best versions of themselves, I guess.
So there's a real opportunity here for organisations to step up and do more to support female colleagues going through the menopause. Baz, so we've heard about the importance of education in the workplace and the topic of menopause. How should employers put this into practice?
Yeah, I think you've got to be prepared for this not to be easy, right? So I think it's all, we're sat here, we're really positive, we're talking about everything. Like, this doesn't sound taboo, like when you're listening to everyone here talk today. And so you can go, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go into my workplace and in my team meeting, I'm going to talk about the menopause. People could sit there and just go, what are you talking about? I do not want to talk about this. This is private. Or managers, who you are expecting to support women might say, that is not in my job description. I am not going to do that. Or they might not be so openly resistant to it, but people might not want to do it. And also you might then try and support a woman and it might be a complete disaster. You might get it wrong, but that's the same as every managerial situation which you've attempted. I find in women's health, we don't have much resilience. So women will often go once to their GP or go once to their manager, and if they don't get the right support, they'll stop. They're like, that's it, I'm not going back. I had tried to have a conversation, it was an utter disaster. And managers and employees are the same. They might try once, and if that person didn't like the way they did it, or it was just totally, they won't try again. So that's why I think it's really important that the culture is set, that we keep on going. We might mess up. We're all coming from a good place here. We might get our words wrong. We might read this wrong, but I'm coming from a good place. And I think the way to start is start easy. Don't go for like something that really challenges you. Go, I'm going to go and talk to my mum, or I'm going to go and talk to my sister and see what happened to her, or a woman at work that I'm really good friends with, and I know that she's fairly open about her menopausal experience. I'm going to sit down with her and have a cup of tea, and I'm going to say, like, I want to help, but I don't know where to start. Can you tell me about your journey? And by listening and hearing stories, you get less freaked out, and then you start practicing using the language. We have to practice saying menopause, hot flushes, insomnia, anxiety. Like, we have to, and if you can practice saying that vocabulary, I know it sounds really simple and everyone here is really articulate and able to talk about it, but if you haven't used these words before, it's really hard. So I think you have to start somewhere and start easy and keep on and put a support network around you for when you don't nail it, because you won't nail it off the start.
So what advice would you give managers in terms of how they can create that more psychological safety culture in their teams to start the conversation?
I think it's the psychological safety piece for me is having compassion. And for me, compassion means creating a space where you can listen and hear, but then you also don't just say, oh, that sounds tough, and off you go. It's like, oh, that sounds really tough. I'd love to help you with that. I don't have the answers, and I'm not even going to attempt to tell you that my wife had HRT and it worked for her. I'm not going to attempt to go anywhere near that space, but I'd love to support you if that would work for you. And you hold their hands, you don't just kind of disappear with them. So if they're going off to occupational health, you check in and say, oh, how did that go? Like, what did they offer? Oh, does that sound about right? You think that's going to help? So you have compassion in this space.
Helen.
I think that would be fabulous. I mean, I would volunteer to be that person. You come and talk to me. I just want to share all the things that I've gone through so that other people don't feel like I felt.
So lastly, Helen, looking back through your personal experience, what advice would you give others going through a similar experience?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. If there are older members of staff within your team or in your family that you can ask and get advice from, just ask a question, because we all need to talk about it more. We're all going through loads of different life stages. I mean, I was going through with my mum. She was getting diagnosed with dementia at the time. I was getting my brain fog. It was scary. I felt like we were both on the same trip, off to the sunshine, home for the bewildered. And it was a scary place to be, but it didn't need to be like that. If I'd had an understanding and I'd had somebody I could talk to who could offer me advice, I would have been in a much better place. Also, you've got, at the other end of the spectrum, you've got children who are going through anxiety and puberty and things like that. So you've got an elderly relative, you're in the middle and you're spinning all these plates. It's really tough. And the more help we can get and the more advice we can get, it'd be brilliant.
Thanks, Helen. Turning back to you both, after everything we've been talking about, what advice would you both leave employers moving forward?
For me, it's education. You have to start with the education. If like things randomly start turning up around the menopause, it's like, why is it here? Like, why have we suddenly got sanitary products in the toilet? Why are we suddenly having meetings on the menopause? But we have to educate people as to the why, the impact it's having on business, the impact it's having on employees, and what we can do about it. So for me, education has to be at the heart of anything to do with menopause at work.
Thanks, Baz.
I wish I'd gone first, because I was going to say awareness and education. But I also think, picking up on what we've spoken about today, the communication piece as well, and people being confident to talk to each other, but maybe particularly if you're going through something, to have the confidence to talk to your line manager, and keep trying. The support will be there. You've just got to work through it together. And I liked the idea of the line manager and the member of staff sorting it through together and thinking about, well, if we did this, would it work? And yet there are policies, occupational health, employee assistance programs out there that could wrap around that level of support. You could put a policy in place, but the conversation has to be there, and it has to be comfortable, and it has to be frequent. So yeah, very similar to what Baz was saying, really.
I think in summary, it's really clear that the menopause is a conversation that's higher on the agenda now, that it's a complicated topic, that there's many different elements to it, and that there's so much an organisation can do to help support female colleagues going through the same experience. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. It's been a really open and frank discussion. I think we've all probably learnt from each other, and I just hope that any organisation that is watching this starts to think seriously about some of the steps that they can take to help female colleagues stay at work.